and then whenever you're ready.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come and be together with us today. This is great. You know, uh, Jupiter is a vast topic. Jupiter rules everything big. In my book, The Heart of Astrology, in chapter 9, which was the chapter on Jupiter, I started it with the etymology of the word enthusiasm, which means to be alive with God, which is the Jupiter method. It's the Jupiter message. It's the Jupiter essence. That's what Jupiter is about, is this need to inseminate everything with his being. Now, Jupiter is one of those planets that's kind of misunderstood. And the material around Jupiter and to bring the inner sanctum to life in your own heart requires a little concentration on some areas that are often overlooked in astrology. One of the great astrologers of our generation, Rob Hand, and I used to get together for no apparent reason. I mean, we just liked each other. We got together at every conference, and we would often sit together when when we would be attending the same talks. Well, when the a talk was coming to a conclusion, he said, Bob, we're in the only profession where we can be 45 years old and still be kids. Well, by that conversation, you know how long ago this conversation was. Um, I'm 77 now, and and uh, and Rob is not doing so well health-wise. But the point is, uh, he asked me at that conference, at that very conference, he said, I really don't understand Jupiter. Now, let's get clear with this. He said this after having written a voluminous amount of material on Jupiter, and he was considered to be an authority on many things, on planets in transit. It sold over 500,000 copies. Planets in Youth was like on the bestseller list for astrologers, and on and on, all of this stuff. But he put it to me, and it triggered something, and I shared with him a book called Spiritual Astrology by Krishna Namacharya. Again, Rob was, very steeped in the Western tradition, and me, I'm an old Hindu, and so sort of digging through the annals of what goes on in Indian astrology to come up with some things that he could use as crossover material. Brought me to this. This is a quote out of this book, Spiritual Astrology. The power that is hidden in the arrangement can be compared to an electrical current in a cell. No individual part of a cell contains the current. It is the arrangement of the various parts in the cell that produces the current. Such a power in any arrangement is called apurva, which is a Sanskrit word meaning not existing before. So it is an analogy to the fact that Jupiter brings things about and brings them into existence. Now, as astrologers, we know that, signs, houses, planets, aspects are all part of what builds the astrological frame of reference. But the planets create. They're the ones that create things. So what role does Jupiter play? What does it mean, king of the gods? Well, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But I wanted to remind people of something in our Western Christian tradition that illuminates the way that the mindset works in India a lot. The book of John begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What a thought. What a concept. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and God was the Word. That, in a nutshell, is a Christian explanation of creation from the sense of what Jupiter contributes to this process. Now, again, I probably worked harder on this talk than anything I've worked on talk-wise recently, because it is so difficult for me with Moon and Gemini to extract what is of essence from the myriad of materials that's out there. When I was in graduate school, I took one semester to study the work of Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, T.Z. Suzuki said, the Buddhist philosopher said, all Western philosophy really ends with Nietzsche, which is, the final conclusion of what the nihilism of Western philosophy is about. Well, a professor of mine that was teaching this, semester-long seminar pulled me aside and says, you should really examine this. It was a correspondence between Nietzsche and a German biologist that he had been in school with. And the biologist had gone to Africa, and the correspondence was going back and forth. And the biologist said, I've decided I'm only going to study this one specific species of leeches. And a little bit later than that, a few years later, he says, I've decided I'm only going to study the central nervous system of this one particular species of leeches. And then a few years later, he says, I'm only studying the brain pan of this. And then he wrote, and this is where the correspondence ends with the exchange here. He says, I know more about the brain pan of this leech than any other living human being. And Nietzsche wrote back and says, yes, but some things aren't worth knowing. And it hit me that this is exactly where we are with understanding Jupiter, is to try and get to the essence. And I would do you a disfavor if I didn't go to the core of what I have come to understand about this being, Jupiter. What makes Jupiter unique is that the planets are literal beings, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the point is, Jupiter is different than all the other planets, because the planets belong to a kingdom called the Deva kingdom. They're literal beings. They're not some construction of the human imagination or a mental construction that describes phenomenon. They're literal beings, but they have a different type of evolution than the human kingdom, except for Jupiter. Jupiter actually went through evolution and came out in the human form, went through the inner planes of consciousness, and then became Jupiter, overtook this specific position of being what you can refer to as the hub of the wheel. All other deities in the Deva kingdom report to him. Well, what does that mean for us? Who cares? Well, it means this. If you are contacting parts of yourself that are reflected by the various deities in the kingdom, like Mars is a real entity, and you have difficulties with your anger, your lust, or your aggression, or your energy. You can talk to Mars. You can actually, if you are in the Hindu tradition, or even if you're not, but the tools are there to petition Mars to give you help. See, Mars, it rules your anger, it rules your energy, it rules your push, but it also rules fire. It rules, heat, of many other things in the external world. So there is a triangle between any planet and the internal event and the external event. And getting a handle on that interaction leads you back to being able to talk directly to the planet. Now, it was never a stretch to me because I was born with memory of past lives, and I spent many lifetimes in India and had a lot of ammunition around things that I took for granted, but other people weren't so hot on. Both of my parents were Christian ministers. God bless them. I was very close to both of them. Thank God. they accepted me as I am, and I flourished. But my point is, there are, mirror images of this in things in the Western tradition. As many of you have been in Gestalt therapy, and if you've been with a Gestalt therapist, you know the drill of talking to an empty chair, where you pretend that somebody else is there that you have a problem with, and you go through some discussion with them, and you reach some kind of resolution. I'm simplifying it, but you know the drill. And also, some of you may have been blessed to know Ira Progoff, who invented the intensive journal keeping technique, where you write in a journal, and in the process of writing in the journal, one of the exercises is to come to terms with somebody that you have a problem with in life. And I can tell you that works. It absolutely works. And I can tell you that dialoguing with somebody that's not literally physically present works. And again, there are structures, there are rules for how it's done in order to bring about some beneficial end results. When we talk about Jupiter, we always have to infer Saturn. Why? Well, Saturn was Jupiter's father. Again, backing into the mythology here, but it's kind of important. Jupiter was born, and his mother kept him alive. And Jupiter had a blessing. Again, he's the planet of luck. He survived. Well, what happened when Demeter, his mother, had a child? Well, Saturn come along and ate them. He devoured his children. Well, what happened when Jupiter was born and Saturn came to devour him? Jupiter's mother gave Saturn a stone and said, "This is your child." And Saturn ate the stone, not being any the wiser. And the expression that is in our common parlance, you have to give Saturn a stone. And it is, again, a bribery, a redirection, which again is one of the things that Jupiter is famous for. You talk about Jupiter's luck. Do you remember when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, and all of this sex tape came out where he was talking about grabbing women by the pussy, and everybody was saying you have to resign, and just like, And the next day, Chris Christie endorsed him. And all of a sudden, everybody forgot about the, the terrible things that he said. And he has a very strong Jupiter in his chart, the ability to deflect, to make light of, to make something humorous out of something that's actually tragic. And that, we understand Jupiter by watching people with the prominent Jupiters in their chart. Now, I wanted to talk. Oh God, there's so much here. Let me just quickly go through this. You know, um, where did creation come from? Why is there something here? I mean, you don't have to be a genius or a scientist or a Scientologist, for that matter, to recognize that creation is empty. This is an illusion. But what is the reality behind it? It's that life is one. God is one. And everything that happens in imagination. This is all an illusion. But why is it there? You can look at it from two angles, which are actually the same. One is God wanted to know himself. He wanted to have consciousness. Creation happened for the evolution of form so that there could be a direct knowing and a direct appreciation for that one reality. You can also look at it as God is love. And love must love. But there's no one for God to love but himself. So he had to imagine himself as lover and the beloved. And this long process that we have to go through to unite with our real self all comes from the original whim of God to know himself, to have the experience of his divine essence. And, Jupiter has a critical role because he plays the hub of the wheel in creation and balances. It isn't just that all the other deities report to him and the angels come and get direction from him and stuff. That's all true, but that's not what's important here. What is important here is that in order for the illusion to remain, there has to be a balance of elements, and the adjustment has to go on continually. And somebody has to be the big administrator sitting in that spot. Jupiter, going through creation, gets to the inner planes of consciousness. Again, this takes thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But when Jupiter gets to the place that he overcomes all of the obstacles and obtains the throne, he can only have that position for 104,000 years. 4 precessions of the equinox. And then he has, and again, you can find this in Hindu scriptures and stuff, but you can also find reference to this in Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell's book, where he talks about how Indra has to come back into a human form in order to progress in consciousness. Having a physical form is a big hoop-de-doo, because when you're disincarnate, you can't progress. You can't go forward. You can you're still there. You didn't die, but you can't move forward spiritually until you take another human form. So even Jupiter, being very lofty on the third inner plane of consciousness and being able to see and control all the matter and energy in the universe, he still could not unite with the divine one reality. So he had to take a human form, and then quickly through a human form, he can eventually obtain enlightenment. God, you know, I I'm trying to think. Maybe it would be helpful if I could show you something. Let me let me see if I can share this with you. Oh boy. If you can see this, this is a picture of the chakras. And Saturn rules the base chakra. Now, my daughter, Katie, pointed out to me something that I explored a bit, which is that when the sperm impregnates the ovum and the fetus starts to develop, the first thing to develop is the base of the spine, where the Saturn chakra is, which Saturn rules definition. Saturn rules boundaries. Saturn rules time. And then the second chakra that develops is Jupiter. Well, what is Jupiter? Well, we know Jupiter's big things. We know Jupiter, has something to do with morality and something to do with luck. But the point is that Jupiter is responsible for impregnating, multiplying. I mean, just to be complete, Jupiter rules multiplication, Saturn rules division, Mars rules subtraction, Venus rules addition. Now, Mars is the next chakra going up, the system of chakras. Another lecture that I've given, Mars and the Life of the Spirit, is Mars is your reason for incarnating. It was the things, if you didn't want anything, you wouldn't be here. So the root desire brings you back into incarnation. And again, Venus being in the middle of the karmic system here, that rules the heart chakra, and it's the balancing mechanism. And if your energy is stationed in the heart chakra, as Alice Bailey tells us, do you feel good about most of the people most of the time? And for the spiritual aspirant, the heart chakra is indispensable because it is the thing that allows us to finally accept the world as it is. Like, you and I, and everybody that we know, is appalled by things that go on every day in the world, that we've come to, that politicians lie. Politicians take advantage of people. We trust them and they blackmail us. They stab us in the back. It's like, it's the way of the world. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't take our stand on truth and advocate for something better, but to be able to get to that place where we genuinely accept that this is all in divine order. This is the way things are supposed to happen. Mercury, I'm going to talk about the Mercury chakra, which is our communication. It's, again, all of this is in another lecture that I gave, which the importance of the physical body. But the point is, Mercury is our lower mind, just as Jupiter is our higher mind. Mercury collects facts from the environment, digests them, gives them to the moon stores them, distills them, and then finally Jupiter takes them from the moon, and we have our higher wisdom that comes from it. It's like the old adage, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So we have this genuflect going on between um, Saturn and uh, and Jupiter. You know, Saturn limits Jupiter's expanse, and Jupiter gives life and meaning to the boundaries that Saturn puts in place. In other words, a river with no boundaries would never reach the ocean. But a river without any water, just boundaries, does not refresh, does not harmonize, does not bring about life. Jupiter and Saturn have this relationship. Mercury, on the other hand, is very necessary for Jupiter. And Jupiter is wise, but Mercury is the part of us that picks up the particular details of what's going on in life. It is our sense perception. It is our ability to reason. It's our ability to add and subtract and make sense out of things. So Jupiter can be wise, but it can't have any application of that knowledge without Mercury, which, Mercury was the only god in Mount Olympus that could go into the underworld and come out unscathed. Mercury could go anywhere. It was the perpetual youth. So Jupiter and Mercury have a reflection with each other. There's not time to go through it, but there is a healing connection between the second chakra and the fifth chakra, which is the Jupiter chakra, or the Mercury chakra. But the point is here is just that we're getting a sense for what Jupiter does, and to see Jupiter as this all benevolent figure is good, and it's only half of the story. Jupiter is the cosmic entity, the planet, but each of us has a Jupiter inside of us. Well, what about the mythology of Jupiter? Jupiter is the king of the gods. He was a philanderer, a drunk. And what does that tell us about ourselves? Is there some need to pay special attention to Jupiter in our own chart? We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm tabling it because I'm going to do something that is completely beside the point, but I wanted to do it anyway. And so there. I wanted to show you the literature that's available on Jupiter. And I'll give you a quick synopsis of it. And the reason I want to do that is because if you send me an email, it wouldn't be really possible to write all of this down right now. And I wanted to share it in one page, which meant that I had to eliminate about 2/3 of the books that were on this list. But I wanted to tell you about where you can explore some of the things that we're talking about today a little bit deeper. And I will be happy, anything that I've talked about, anybody that sends me an email, I will answer it. And if you want this list or any of the diagrams that I may inadvertently be showing you, I'd be happy to do that. Stephen Arroyo wrote this book in 1996, Exploring Jupiter. It was simply the first thing in the traditional astrological tradition that made sense. It's very well documented. There's a lot of case histories, and I thoroughly recommend reading it. Michel Guaquelin wrote this, Michel Guaquelin wrote lots of material. Did any of you here see him while he was alive or go to any of his lectures? I know I'm a fossil, I'm in the dinosaur realm, but I actually knew him and went to a number of his lectures and workshops. He studied immense amount of charts, and he showed that certain professions had,
Parce qu'il y a une conférence, je me souviens que c'était maintenant, c'est live.
C'est du live.
Oui, je regarderai la replay de toute façon.
Sorry about that, Bob. You can go ahead.
That's what I'm saying is that Michel Guaquelin studied, Mars, which he showed that Mars is more prominent statistically in the sports champions and moon and charts of writers and so on, all of these different planets. But when he studied Jupiter, he found that Jupiter, the extroverted planet, was very prominent in the charts of actors, people who performed. And for the extroverted actors, the ones which he called the immoderate actors, it was very prominent. Now, one of his studies, he showed, all of these different actors, but being French, most of his examples and most of the people that he went into any depth with were French, which I didn't have, much currency with. But he did something that I thought was amazing, which he did a study of German soldiers during the Second World War. And all of, looking at all the planets, the only planet that deviated from the norm over thousands of charts, and he and his wife, Francois, calculated, when they would do these studies, they would often calculate 10,000 charts by hand. This was before computers. What he found was Jupiter was the dominant planet in the Nazi hierarchy. And, Hitler and, Himmler and, Heydrich and all of these people, had very, Bormann, all of had an angular Jupiter. Now, what makes this interesting for us is that we come to understand that Jupiter is not always what we would call a greater benevolent figure. He is run amok at times, and I'll come back to this in a couple minutes, but I'm just going to quickly go through this. Liz Green just wrote this book, which my friend Arlen Weiss turned me on to, which I'm very happy about, called By Jove. And if any of you are Liz Green fans, which I've never been, but I've read her books, this is definitely her finest work and pretty carefully documented. And she goes through the psychology and the mythology of Jupiter in a very deep way. This book by Julia Purdy, The Jupiter Advantage, is extremely well researched, and she shows the connection between people having the sun and Jupiter in 144 sun Jupiter combinations. And what is, again, her meanings and write-ups are great. But what what's the winning quality for me is it was very well researched. Now, Balkachuri wrote this book called Everything and the Nothing, and he got this just from Meher Baba just before he passed away. And he wrote this book, and he gives a tremendous amount of information on what literally happens on the inner planes of consciousness and the role that Jupiter plays. And for that reason alone, I think it is totally worth reading. And I just put in there that, the pertinent section is between pages 76 and 83. Krishna Namacharya wrote this book, Spiritual Astrology, which I was reading about, from earlier. There's just this passage between 195 and 198 is a very, very good introduction from a theosophical and Hindu frame of reference of how Jupiter operates. Alan Leo wrote this book, Jupiter the Preserver. I was a big Alan Leo fan, and I got to tell you, the first time I read Jupiter, I did not understand it at all. It was written just before he passed away, and I thought, well, okay. But I reread it just recently, and it is deep. It's difficult because so often people who write about Jupiter, particularly when they're in the theosophical vein, they have a way of speaking and a way of looking at things in life that is foreign. It's a different viewpoint than we normally have. And then I put my own book on here, The Heart of Astrology, chapter 9, which is, was a springboard for where the talk came from today. But of course, none of the material very little of the material in that chapter actually is in this talk. Dane Ridger wrote assiduously. He, wrote on everything, but his book, The Astrological Study of Psychological Complexes, has a really compelling argument and study for the relationship between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, if you've never been a Dane Ridger fan, you may find this work a little easier to read than some of his other works, but it's not going to convert you into a follower by any stretch of the imagination, because he had this, what would you say, layered way of looking at life. Anyway, K.N. Sarasvati wrote a little book on Jupiter in Tamil that was translated in English, and I got it back in 1990 through the AFA. And again, most of the book is about rituals and charms and things that you can do to influence Jupiter, which has never been my interest. But he has some deep insights into the way that Jupiter operates. Carl Payne Toby's collected works, which were edited by this woman, Naomi Bennett, is worth a read. Alan Oken was staying with me, and he would, pick a new book off the bookshelf every night and dive into it. And he came back the next day and he says, "This is terrible. His astrology is all wrong." Carl Payne Toby has some really good things to say on a number of subjects, but he didn't believe in reincarnation. He didn't believe in karma. He had a more Western, completely analytic and incorrect vision of the way that things worked in astrology, but he was a brilliant man. And the book is worth reading. And there is a section of the book called Jupiter and Its Shortcuts that's worthy of your time. There is the book of Jupiter by Marilyn Warman, and I read it after having read Stephen Arroyo's book, which covers some of the same material, but again, it was very well researched and worthy of your time. It was published in 1993, so it's actually aged pretty well. Anyway, I'm done with the literature. I felt I needed to do that because, at times it can sound like I'm making shit up as I go along, but I actually did get it from somewhere. And one of the things that happened that I learned to do when I had a question about Jupiter is I started talking directly to him, the same way that I had talked to Mars, or same way that I talked to the moon or the sun or Mercury. I got to say, for me, Mercury was the hardest to hold a conversation with because, the expression in the New Age literature that Mercury is the trickster. Well, trust me, it is, and it's very difficult um, to get a handle on how Mercury works. But if you can get him into a conversation, he is brilliant and will unfold his station and his work, as will Jupiter. And Jupiter and Venus, of course, I'm a Libran, and so Venus was very easy because she's adorable and she's open and wants to share. So I'm just
I'm sorry, Bob. We're frozen. I know. Yeah.
be going with this. Let me pull this up here again. June. Okay, I got to find this share button. Jupiter. All right.
Bob, sorry. I
Yeah,
had lost internet for a moment, so we missed a minute or two of what you were saying.
that's okay. I'm still here, and I think my recording is functioning. Okay.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So if you just want to recap the last minute or so.
Oh, I need help. I have no idea what I was talking about. I was talking about Jupiter literature,
That's
and
that's okay. That's okay. I do
I'm
that all the time. Uh,
I'm I'm trying to see where it is that uh, I was, and maybe I'm not going to be able to get this up. Uh, wow, it's kind of a stone drag. I apologize to everybody for not being the sharpest penny in the pile when it comes to these things that I'm trying to convey to you. Let me see if I can get this up here. If you can see this, this is the zodiac, and
uh, if
if
you
you
could double click on that you've highlighted, and then we'll be able to see it.
okay, it says sharing. It says
Yeah.
it's not showing up.
Yeah. So go ahead and stop share and then share again, and we'll probably see it then.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a Zoom problem.
okay, and now um,
And just go ahead and share again on Zoom.
okay, share Zoom. Okay, this is can you see
There
that?
it is. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, this is a diagram that was done for me by Paula Bellamini. It's a simplified version of the diagram that's in the front of the book, The Zodiac, A Life Epitome. Here we have the signs split into three groups: the elemental, individual, and universal. The elemental planets are Mars, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, ruling Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. They're the building blocks of life, and then the human experience of life happens through Leo, Gemini, Venus, and Mars in Leo, Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. And this is everything from birth to death that we experience. Leo being birth, Scorpio being death. And then there's the universal signs, which is Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So the Jupiter is here ruling Sagittarius and here in Pisces at the end of the zodiac. And this is, again, deep study. But the point is, we experience the planets in the individual arena, but we don't directly experience the universal principles. This is Walter Sampson's offering in his book, The Zodiacal Life Epitome. I just wanted you to see that. Again, I think it's totally worthy of your time. I will think I give up on screen sharing. There's a number of diagrams here, but I think we'll just do better without them, unless there's something that I absolutely have to have, which I just discovered there is something that I have to have here, and I'll go to it right now if I can. Let me see if I can get to this here. This is the can you see this? Am I not screen sharing this?
Yeah, not yet.
Okay, well,
So,
here, let's try this here. This is the fire signs. This is a talk that I give about how to harness Jupiter, how to bring Jupiter into the fold. So there's some big problems with Jupiter. Obviously, Jupiter's everything big. Jupiter is king of the gods. Mars rules Aries, the sun rules Leo. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Well, what could be healthier, happier? Mars is energy. The sun is the center of everything. Jupiter is luck. What's wrong with this picture? Well, there are three categories of experience. Because Jupiter rules not just wisdom, but Jupiter rules hypocrisy, pretending to be something that you're not. And, if you do a deep study on the Nazis, they spent a tremendous amount of time designing their uniforms. And they had all of these big demonstrations and parades and swastikas everywhere. But it was all for show. It was all theatrics. Of course, obviously, terrible things happened out of it, but there was no substance to it. Mars rules desire. The sun, Leo, rules the ego, the center of things. So what happens when we're king of the gods and everybody else is our servant? We're we're in control. We're the driving force. Everybody else exists just to serve us. It's a sad realization when you recognize that you're not the only Mars in existence. Your Mars bumps up against, you punch somebody, they punch you back. You pick a fight with somebody, unless you're dominating them completely, they eventually get the upper hand and dominate you. No matter how deep the narcissism runs, you're not the only sun. You live in the illusion where there are many, and you run into many people. And Jupiter may know all the right things to do, but suppose Jupiter knows all the right things and doesn't do them. Jupiter needs to be able to take the theories and put them into action, to commit to them. It doesn't happen by itself. It requires each of us to commit. So beyond hypocrisy, it requires overcoming hypocrisy. The quote goes, hypocrisy is the homage that vice pays to virtue. We acknowledge it without actually living it. So beyond hypocrisy, we also have hubris, which is this overweening belief that we are a law unto ourselves, that whatever we want is good. If it's good for us, it's good for the country, it's good for the world, it's good for creation, which is nice if that's the truth, but 99.99% of the time it isn't. It is a fallacy. So what is the final problems with Jupiter is it degenerates into ruthlessness, becoming incredibly cruel, believing that it's exterminating 6 million Jews is the absolute right thing for everybody. And as when Stalin killed 45 million what he called kulaks, or wealthy landowners, which he starved them to death. That is Jupiter run amok, believing that what one does is good for everybody. And it is a difficulty to be overcome for any of us. So to recognize Jupiter's shortcomings and to balance Jupiter out with Saturn, but with all of the other energies, with all of the other planets, with all of the other chakras. The Sun, Venus, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, all rule chakras, all rule our energy systems, are all direct significators of parts of our personality, which we can work with, appeal to, and do the common things that improve life for us. But there are the outer planets are there, but they wreak havoc in our life until we have come to our adjustment with Jupiter and Saturn, which is a base of the spine, our survival instinct, and our desire. Jupiter is, the Hitler's idea of Lebensraum is like, we need land, we need more territory. Jupiter multiplies. We need to, multiply the Aryan race. We need to have more pregnancies amongst people who fit that profile. All of that is Jupiter run amok. And again, when we see people acting out and doing something gross, even if the person is like right in our face, like Donald Trump, it's a reminder that, hey, we have these qualities in us, and it's not our job to control anybody else. It's our job to control ourselves. And to control doesn't mean to bury our truth, doesn't mean to hide. Again, I had a bunch of material on Jupiter in development. I might try just one quick screen share on one other thing here, if I can. Let me see if I can do that, and then I'll call it quits, because obviously I don't want to go down every rabbit hole here. Let me see. Okay, what do we do for screen share here? Okay. This is the mutable signs with Mercury and Jupiter. Again, this is a pairing of the second chakra and the fifth chakra, which is long conversation. But needless to say, when you have a good aspect between Mercury and Jupiter in your chart of birth, a trine or a sextile, it is very difficult for you to tell a lie, because you want to speak the real truth that you're holding in your higher consciousness. Our ethics, however trickly it might be, is there, and it needs to come out. Our conscience wants to express itself. So the mutable signs are at the change of a season. We have cardinal, fixed, mutable. The cardinal signs are action, the fixed signs are stationary, and the mutable signs are where we adjust. We have straight line motion with cardinal signs. We have rotary motion with the fixed signs, and we have vibratory motion with the mutable signs. What is vibratory motion? Something going back and forth. It vibrates. It's literally something that is existing in two places at once. It's spanning a season, something from winter going into spring, something from spring going into summer, something from summer going into fall, and fall going into winter. And Jupiter and Mercury are at these linchpin places. Again, huge amount of information here, but I just felt it was important to share that with you. I don't know, as I've been self-editing as we've gone along here, I've presented about a 10% of the stuff that I wrote that I was going to talk about today. But, I do have Moon and Gemini, and I get going on one thing, and it like with Jupiter, it multiplies. Looky, I'm going to talk a little. I'm happy to stop and answer any questions. I've said that from the beginning, but I'm going to talk briefly about planets.
Bob, we do have a question.
In your chart.
So
what's the question?
hold on. Let me pass the mic.
It's more of a comment about your fire. You're talking about Aries and Mars, and the self with Leo, and I'll say truth with Jupiter. And you said this realization is sad, and I that you're not the only one, let's say. And I would just push back on them and say that this realization is beautiful, because anybody here knows that when you share or when you give or of service, that is the most I don't know, wonderful feeling. And people who don't give of service don't understand that feeling and the benefit of it. And to me, that's the epitome of Jupiter at its best. That's all.
I think I agree with you 100%, but how to get to the best. And I'm going to read a quote out of Meher Baba's Discourses, which is my Bible. I read something from the Discourses every day, like a fundamentalist Christian reading out of the Bible. This is on page 396 out of the Discourses. True happiness begins when one learns the art of right adjustment to other persons. And the right adjustment involves self-forgetfulness and love. Hence arises the spiritual importance of transforming a life of limited self into a life of love. Love is always the answer. And it is that empathetic bond. When you see somebody in pain, like most of us or some of us are parents, or we have marriage partners. And when our marriage partner or our children or our parents, for that, are in pain, we experience it. We have an empathetic response to their situation. We may get angry if our child does something stupid, but we still feel their pain. Jupiter is in its exaltation in Cancer, the symbol of the family. And we are connected with everyone, but we have this circle around us that we draw and we say these people belong and these people don't. When our heart expands, where we see somebody else's child that's suffering and we feel love for them the way we would for our own child, we're on the road to starting to get something right. We're starting to evolve as a human being. That is a beautiful thing, that opening. We start with people that we have the history and the connection with. But it eventually expands to where we eventually can feel love, where Jesus says, if you can't love each other, how can you love even the people who torture you? How can you get to the place where you have that expansive love? So this is huge, and you're quite right that it is a wonderful thing. But have you never known? I mean, I will mention, I've been an astrologer for a long time. There are a couple of friends of mine who I'm still friends with who were going to give a lecture and asked me for notes on eclipses or on minor aspects, something I have a lot of notes on. And I gave them my notes, and they took my notes and gave the lecture sometimes verbatim without ever mentioning the fact that they got it from me. Now, it's not a narcissistic wound that I bring it up. It's only to point out that that's how the illusion perpetuates itself. And the way I try really hard to annotate where any of my own thoughts come from, just because it's cleansing. Eileen Nauman and I worked together in the early 70s in medical astrology. And I gave her all of my medical astrology notes. And I said, I'm not going to write anything on this for publication, but you can take it and do what you think is right. When she released the first book of medical astrology, the American Book of Medical Astrology, she dedicated it to me and gave me credit for all the material that was in it. Why? Well, it was just the right thing to do. I was like, I didn't ask her to do that. It was just an acknowledgement that this material came from somewhere else. Something else prompted my own thinking. And I share that with you in that thought. Now, I'm happy to entertain any other question or comment, but I did want to just dot the I's and cross the T's here with how Jupiter works.
We do have a question or two.
Okay, fine.
I just hold it like this.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Bob. My name is Margaret. I have a moon in Gemini also. So I know what it's like. Anyway, recently I read, I don't know how often Jupiter comes together with other planets, but I have Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in the 8th house.
In
Can
your
you
chart?
speak in my chart?
Yeah, when
In
was
my
you?
birth chart.
You were born in 1940.
1940.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Jupiter and Saturn are on a 20-year cycle with each other. They come together every 20 years. And people who are born at that time are, as Dane Ridjar would say, they are seed people. They are they are born to make something new happen. Now, it depends, on a number of other factors. But I have a client that was born with the sun, Jupiter, Saturn conjunct, and then Mercury. So people with that had, any planet that intercedes between the sun and Mercury influences the way that the person's mind works. And for information to get from Mercury, it had to go for this person through the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which means she had to evaluate its importance for the culture in order for her to integrate it into her being, into her thinking. And so she ended up being a college professor and did all of the stuff that goes on in academia. And we became friends, and I had a chance to watch it. I've known a number of other people with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. The eighth house, has to do with inheritance, has to do with affairs of the dead. It has to do with astral projection and a ton of other things. But the point is, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the eighth house is a prompting for us spiritually to decide what stays and what goes. What do we have to eliminate in order to move forward? Anyway, I don't want to say too much because so much depends on everything else that's going on in the chart. But thank you for your question, and I hope that
Yeah, thank
that
you
was
so much.
some use to you. Any other questions here? Oh,
Yes. The mutual reception between Jupiter and Saturn, does that mean that the two planets just can be in, well, I don't know what I want to ask about it, but I have several charts that have that in it.
Jupiter,
They're both Capricorns.
Jupiter in Capricorn and Saturn in Sagittarius.
Jupiter in Capricorn
Yes.
and Saturn in Pisces.
In Pisces. Okay, that's different.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's different.
Jupiter in Capricorn always has to work hard. Saturn in Pisces is a difficulty because they never know where the boundaries are, where to place the marking post in the sand so that they know, okay, here's how much territory I have. Here's how much leeway I have. Now, of course, the whole chart can change so many things, but the mutual reception between Jupiter and Saturn in this instance is always puts a weight on us, because how do you hold back the ocean? How do you build a seawall that protects you? And how do you have fun when Jupiter is in the sign of the fun police? Jupiter was in Capricorn and in Abraham Lincoln's chart, and you'll know many people with Jupiter in Capricorn where they have this weight on them. No pain, no gain. You have to work hard for what you got, and they can be it depends on what else is going on in the chart. It can be incredibly inquisitive, but any mutual reception is an invitation to have these two planets work together in a new way. Suppose you're renting an apartment, but you own the apartment that your landlord is living in. Well, wouldn't it behoove the two of you to share notes and to figure out what you can do to support each other? and how you can both benefit from that connection. And your tenant is calling you up and saying, my toilet is leaking, and I think you got to do something. This is an emergency. And you're saying, well, hey, guess what? The heat isn't on in my apartment. It's like, can we get together and figure out how to help each other here? And make no mistake, the mutual reception between Jupiter and Saturn is not a passive mutual reception. It does require putting on our thinking cap and figuring out how to uncover things that stand in the way. Other mutual receptions work much easier. Try the mutual reception between Jupiter and Mercury. It's like they're in each other's territory. It requires a good deal of work so that Mercury knows what to gather together to give to Jupiter, and Jupiter knows what to make out of what Mercury's presenting. I mean, and mutual reception is another whole talk. It's an important one, but just
Will
let
you
me
do it sometime, please?
It requires those two components of your nature learning to work together. And sometimes they externalize. Well, there'll be two people in your life that you will see, and you'll have to do what Gandhi did when you have two people, and Gandhi, when he had two people in the Congress Party that butted heads, he would try to sort it out, and then he would put them in a room together and say, tell me when you got it sorted out, and we'll see what we can do to implement it. And when two people started talking together, they figured it out. A friend of mine, Judy Luther, sent me an ad. It was an ad that ran online for Heineken's, and it was brilliant because it had two people who had nothing in common put in a room to solve problems together. And it was brilliant. I ran it in my newsletter a couple of times because I thought, wow, I know this is an ad for Heineken's, but this is a brilliant message of how you learn through sharing to get along with somebody that you don't get along with very well. Now, I know I can be cynical on this and saying, yeah, that works fine if both people are, got their oars in the water and are sane. If you're dealing with somebody who's completely out of their mind, all bets are off. Any other questions here?
Bob, we have a couple questions.
A question, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, this is about the getting your take on a couple questions with transiting Jupiter. And the first one is any thoughts on the long-term conjunction that we still have, I think, active with Jupiter and Sirius?
Let me stop and say, having Moon in Gemini, like any of the other people with Moon in Gemini, I've studied probably every conceivable system in astrology, a little bit, like the North Platte River, a mile wide and an inch deep. This is my long-winded way to say I focus entirely in my own work with clients and in my work with the general circumstances in the world with 12 signs, 10 planets, and 10 aspects. It's not that I poo-poo anybody else's anything. I have a really good friend. He's a triple Pisces. He does Burmese astrology. They don't use any planets, and they have only 49 different charts. And he gave me a brilliant reading with it. I have, again, this is my way of not commenting on what the long range conjunction of Jupiter with Ceres might be. But I will tell you, Jupiter expands anything that it touches. I had a client who is perennially depressed and worried about absolutely everything. And God put us together. And so for many, many, many years, she has been a client of mine. But she's always, even when she's making millions of dollars and owning a lot of different things, she's like, oh, she's always worried about something. Well, of course, she's a Capricorn. That goes with the territory. But I said, hey, Jupiter is going to conjunct your sun. Grab a hold of the brass ring. She called me up 2 days after that and said, I was happy for a day. When Jupiter was exactly on my sun, I was happy. Well, I'm saying, okay, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. And we are in a time period now with all of this stuff going on in Aries. The new moon, is in Aries is afflicted us with the desire to act. Well, great. And we are acting. We are in motion. This is a wonderful thing. And Jupiter is still the hub of the wheel and still has control. Anything that other people get out of asteroids, minor planets, the trans-Neptunian planets, well, sometimes it's amazing stuff. But I get what I need without going in that direction. I will tell you that I have earlier in my youth, I made a lot of use of asteroids because I always filled in the blanks for something that I didn't see. And I practiced almost exclusively Uranian astrology for a few years. And I came to the conclusion that this is brilliant astrology. It's wonderful, but it's meant for people with a lot more brain power than me. Holding all of that together in my mind was cumbersome. Also, it has to do with your purpose. And my purpose is to love God and unite with Him through that love. And my work with my clients, if I choose to work with them, anything beyond an initial session, is just to help them elevate their consciousness. And life is too short, and there's plenty of other astrologers out there that do all kinds of other things. And to do all the other stuff is great. But I don't do it anymore. Life is too short. I studied one of my teachers, Al Morrison, told me after his second Saturn return that after second Saturn returns, which happens for everyone around 60, how your time is spent becomes most important. And, you can be a billionaire or a bag lady, but you still get 24 hours every day. And I would prefer to put my time where I think it's going to do the most good, both to help me stay in a loving space, but also to help other people get there as well. So that's my non-answer to your totally legitimate question.
Well, the second
So-
question is you already started to answer, I believe, a little bit, but it has to do with Jupiter in square to this huge stellium in Aries, and if you might speak to that.
Okay. Jupiter is in Cancer, all of these planets in Aries, fire and water. If you there was a brilliant astrologer who a lot of people didn't pay much attention to after she passed on, Zipporah Davin. And reading all of her books, she says when you come to a person whose chart is dominated by water and fire, they are emotional yo-yos. Well, this is a time period that sort of captures that spirit. We are battered around by, what is current at the moment. Jupiter still holds the key, but we have all of this stuff in fire that is demanding some kind of expression. And we'll see later this month when Uranus goes into Gemini, we will see an explosion of this, and it will gather energy as time goes on. Yeah, it is a very fertile time. And it is if you just look at what's going on in the world, you would, of course, you'd believe in God. If it wasn't for God, we would have killed ourselves by now. It's like it's too high tension. People are too angry, and the abuse has been too fertile. It was sort of like when the Epstein files were released. You'd think, oh my God, not him too. It was like, oh, I don't want to see this. It was like the stuff was going on, and I was like, oh Lord, help us. And it's like Donald Trump and Israel declaring war on Iran. It's like, oh, please, you got to be joking. This can't be happening. But of course, and if you look at the aspects, they're very violent, and it can, regardless of what looks like it's going to end, it's not. And the stuff is going to percolate for years. And it doesn't take a genius or a very competent astrologer to be able to see that. Anything else? Anybody want to?
Yeah, Kelly has a question, and then we'll take Lori after that.
Okay.
Hi, Bob. I just have a simple question. When you mentioned fixed signs and rotary motion, I don't know what rotary motion is.
Going in a circle.
Okay, I thought a rotor-rooter, but
right. Well, if you take a copper wire and put it into a circle, and you rotate a magnet inside the copper wire circuit, it produces electricity. When you have straight line motion, it seems like it's going to go on forever. But the universe is a closed system, very big, but it always comes back to where it started. And so rotary motion creates the circle. Vibratory motion is the preparation to move to a new level, to a new something. In yoga, we have the rajasic, which is the active. We have the tamasic, which is the fixed. And we have the sattvic, which is the spiritualizing influence. And all of the mutable signs have the ability to raise consciousness, to move us to something that we haven't seen before, to enrich our lives, to spiritualize us, to bring light into being. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think you're good. Okay, so Lori has a question. She's in the Zoom audience.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Lori.
I have a question. I seem to have so many charts that come my way that have Jupiter square the nodes. And maybe that's because that's what's in my chart as well. So I'm attracting that. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on Jupiter square the nodes.
Let me preface this by saying, if you read Jeff Wolf Green's book on Pluto, is volume 1 and volume 2, he talks about squares to the nodes, and he introduces the concept of interruption to your progress. You can think of the south node is where you've been, the north node of where you're going. The south node in that sense is like Saturn, the north node is like Jupiter in that sense. But a square, any square to the node becomes a planet that requires action, something that you have to concentrate on in order to move forward. So I would, without seeing the chart, I would suggest that whatever Jupiter rules and represents in the chart is something that has an outsized dimension to what the person must deal with in order to make their nodal axis work correctly. I don't know if any of you were big Michael Luton fans, but if you have access to his weekend workshop on the nodes, they are the best, even though that was 30 years ago. It is the best material on the nodes that I've ever seen. And I try to be thorough and try to read whatever's out there. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's what I would say. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Did you have a question, Lori?
That was Lori. So, and Diane Rongren's book on lunar nodes is also excellent.
Yes, yes, it is. Excuse me for forgetting to mention that.
I think that's all our questions for the moment.
Okay, I just want to, before we expire here, I wanted to talk about Jupiter in your birth chart. Obviously, the books that I talked about in the literature have great descriptions of Jupiter in the signs and houses and the planetary aspects. But I would couple that with the comment that Jupiter by sign gives us an attitude and an arena, an area of mental life where we feel that we have it coming, that we are confident. You know, it's why Jupiter in Capricorn feels that they have it coming, but they have to work for it. It's like, yeah, I got to do it, but there's something material that has to happen here to make it happen. And why Jupiter often in a fire sign just feels entitled. It's like, oh, okay, this is a natural things. But my point is that it's the houses in the chart that shows us an area of life, a dimension of life, an area of activity where we feel that we have something to teach other people. Yeah, I know all about that. You know, Donald Trump has Jupiter in the second house. He wants to tell everybody all about money and how to make it. And how, it's like he's always calling up his buddies and saying, I'm going to do this tomorrow, and this is going to happen in the stock market. And you can make a lot of money if you do this. It's like totally illegal, but he does it every day. And but the point is, Jupiter points to something. You have, an astrologer who I won't name has Jupiter in the seventh house and wanted to write a book on marriage, saying, of course you do, but you've been divorced 4 times, and it's like, are you going to tell people how to have a successful marriage? It's like what Elizabeth Taylor had 7. It's like, okay, yeah, Jupiter expands. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have anything profound, but the house will show you an area where you feel like, yeah, I got this up my sleeve. I know how to deal the cards here. And the sign is an attitude toward that department. Now, I did want to, again, even if we had a weekend to do this, I couldn't do all of the signs and houses and aspects. But I did want to point out something about Jupiter aspects. Mercury, Jupiter aspects are always extremely important because they show an attachment between information, application, and wisdom. If you read, there was a group of people, I haven't seen them around in recent years, but they were called the Magi Society, and they studied, they wrote a series of books that started with Astrology Really Works. And they were all, I've met them, they were all, like, what would you say, Madison Avenue stock market, Wall Street people. And they had invented the wheel by discovering astrology and wanted to tell everybody how it worked. They showed that there were certain aspects between the sun and Jupiter and Pluto that went along with wealth and the accumulation of wealth. If you get Georgia Stathis's newsletter, she's pointed out the Magnificent Seven companies that, are carrying the weight in the stock market now. They were all formed under Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter, Sun, Pluto aspects. Bill Gates had, Jupiter, Sun, Pluto, trine combination. It's like Jupiter has the ability, working with the sun, to bring about some higher resolution. For me, what's interesting about that is, Grace, who's a close friend of mine, and it's amazing. She keeps putting out this newsletter every month. But she's right. And if you get her newsletter, she tells you things like when Jupiter changes a sign, what areas of the stock market are going to go up and what companies are going to profit. And if you follow her advice, you would make a lot of money. And she's, of course, done quite well for herself. It's not and it's like I love her and I love the research. I'm not particularly interested in following the trend. I have a number of clients that are stockbrokers, and I have made money for them in the past, and they've offered me like to manage a mutual fund and stuff like that. But I don't want to spend my life married to a computer screen following the trends that way. What I'm saying to you, though, is that if you follow Jupiter with an open mind, you will notice that whatever it touches does expand. And it behooves you to pay attention. So many times early in people's study of astrology, it says, well, Jupiter transited my Venus and I didn't, have all of this other stuff. I anticipated I was gonna, like meet this woman and have the love of my life and stuff. And it's like, your chart reflects what's inside of you. But get in contact with what's inside of you and you'll know what to expect. And following the general trend, stuff starts to happen. Anyway, those are just a few things that I wanted to add in. But, Jupiter and Pluto were brothers. Jupiter was on Mount Olympus and Pluto was given rulership over the underworld. And there's great amount of wealth in the underworld, and Jupiter and Pluto working together, they pretty much control the marketplace. And the sun gives an entry point to that. Any other questions or anything else that people wanted to talk about? I appreciate you all spending time together. We went through all of this without even taking a break. And as I say, I edited on the fly. The material here is massive, but I hope that God has blessed me with taking the things that were most important and making sure that they got out without deleting them. One never knows. Anyway.
And we still have 15 minutes if someone has questions, or Bob, if there's something else that you've thought of now that you'd also like to tell us about.
There's always more.
We'd love to hear from you. I could listen to you all day.
I can go back and talk about I know that I'm beating a dead horse on this issue, but so much of the things that we talk about with Jupiter, like the mythology and stuff, think, oh, that's a nice idea. How does it relate to anything? It's an allegory for something else. I'm going to talk to you about something that people take as an allegory and is often talked about as part of mythology. But I can say, as I can with many of the things that I've talked about today, I can verify it with my own experience. Indra is sitting on the throne, and through thousands of years, there's literature written where some yogi practices and tries to dethrone Indra. And he has 3 weapons that blocks the aspirant from being able to kick him off his throne. His most potent weapon is called Indra's net. And I put the description of Indra's net in chapter 1 of my book under comprehensiveness. And it unlocks a truth about how we are all interconnected with each other. Indra has a net, and the net is composed of intersecting lines of time and space. And where they intersect, there exists a single soul. And on the surface of that soul is a reflection of all the other souls in the net. You can see them as beads. In the Soto Zen sect, they meditate on Indra's net. In some schools of the Tibetan Buddhist system, they accept Indra as a patron saint. For astrologers, Indra, Thor, Jupiter, Zeus, many names for the same being. Like I call my mother Mother, and my father calls her Eleanor. Other people have other names for her, but that's another story. My point is that Indra's net is the fabric that holds society together. It holds creation together. It is literally a web, which I have seen a number of times with my own eyes. And when you look into Indra's net, your mind goes off into the infinite. And it's not like just an emotional, oh, wow. It is like an expansion of the material composition of your brain. It is unbelievable. Now, in your birth chart, if I'm an astrologer looking at your birth chart, can I look at that and see your wife or your husband in that birth chart? Yes. I may not be gifted enough to know their name, but I can see what they're doing because everything in the whole universe is shown somewhere in your chart. I can tell you about your pets. I don't know for what reason, but I'm going to tell you this story very quickly. It was in 1978. I had driven across country to the NASO conference in Tucson, Arizona. I'd only been back from India for maybe a week. And I had all of my students in this big car. All of my students, 6 of us, were piled into this station wagon. And we drove across country and stayed in motels and stuff. And we ended up at this conference. And there's this woman, Helene Woodford, and she was giving a workshop called Tropical Lunar Return Charts or Precessionally Corrected Lunar Return Charts. Which one is correct? So I'm thought, oh, this interesting subject. I'll go to this lecture. Look at, you can't make this shit up. I swear to God that this literally happened. So we're in the workshop and she's got these 2 charts for lunar return. And one of them is in the tropical zodiac and the other is a tropical zodiac precessionally corrected. But it isn't just the planets that are there. In the chart, she had the anticians of all the planets, plus all the trans-Neptunian planets and their anticians. And she had 3 house systems, you know, the Placidus, Porphyry, and the Coke house systems shown on the charts. And then there were numbers in each house. And people in the audience were saying, well, what's that symbol? And what's that symbol? So maybe the lecture was an hour and we've gone through a half an hour of the lecture and she's just answering questions. Oh, well, this is that and this is that. And she's explaining. I'm thinking, yeah, gag me with a spoon. But then somebody says, well, are those numbers in the houses? Are they numbers for some of the houses? And she says, oh no, this is a special system of numerology that I worked out. And suddenly I'm sitting next to her, by the way, and I burst out laughing. I'm thinking, this is beyond ridiculous. And I'm pinching myself in the leg. You know how it is when you're a kid and you're sitting in church and you're trying not to laugh, but this was too much. And I got up and left, like, oh, excuse me, because I just couldn't contain myself. It was too ridiculous. But I was interested in her, in whatever she was doing. I thought, well, and I actually, many years later, I talked to one of her children who lives in Hawaii now. But I went to her and I invited her, can I take you to dinner? And I thought, now I'll find out what she's, really doing. I said, well, I just wanted to have dinner with you to find out. I never got the bottom line, which is the best way of doing. She says, oh, they both work. I said, yeah, well, why does that not surprise me, So we're having dinner. She says, could I see your chart? I hate that. I never read somebody's chart over dinner. And I never asked to see anybody's chart in this case. it's not the way that astrology should be done, but I tried to be sympathetic. She's like one of the elders in the field. And I said, yeah, I got a copy here. Let me trace it out for you. And she's looking at it and she starts saying, well, you know, your wife has a girlfriend that's talking really nasty about you right now and trying to convince your wife that you're doing the wrong thing professionally. And she has 3 cats, and those cats are named Mimi, Tara, and she's going on. And this is like Gemini run amok. Of course, a Gemini. And again, it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I swear to God, I'm not exaggerating. And she goes on, and I says, you're getting that all out of my chart? He says, oh no, the lighting is so bad here. I couldn't read your chart. I'm reading the bumps on your forehead. Oh my God. Just give me a gun and shoot me. And it's like all of the stuff that she was telling me was truthful. I mean, it was factual about my wife and my wife's friends and her cats and all of this stuff. But like Nietzsche talking to his friend in Africa, it's like, yeah, but some things aren't worth noting. And anyway, if we have a minute.
That was a great story. Thank you.
It's like, I swear to God, you can't, where would that, I mean, if I saw that as a skit on television, I'd never believe it. But with my own eyes, I'm there and I'm thinking, and this woman has dedicated her life to astrology, and I have great respect for anybody that even dabbles in astrology because it's so vast. Anyway, I came to my spiritual master when I read the first page of the book called The Everything and the Nothing. And I'm going to read you the first page of this book now. It's called The Lover and the Beloved. I started to just recite it earlier when I was talking about creation, but I'm going to read it now. God is love, and love must love. And to love, there must be a beloved. But since God is existence, infinite and eternal, there is no one for him to love but himself. And in order to love himself, he must imagine himself as the beloved, whom he, as the lover, imagines he loves. Lover and beloved implies separation, and separation creates longing, and longing causes search. And the wider and the more intense the search, the greater the separation, and the more terrible the longing. When longing is at its intensest, separation is complete, and the purpose of separation, which was that love might experience itself as lover and beloved, is fulfilled, and union follows. And when union is attained, the lover knows that he himself was all along the beloved whom he loved and desired union with, and that all the impossible situations that he overcame were obstacles which he himself had placed in the path to himself. To obtain union is so impossibly difficult because it is impossible to become what you already are. Union is nothing other than knowledge of oneself as the only one. Jai Baba. Anyway,
that was beautiful.
I have nothing else.
And we have one question in the chat here. So Gail's asking, when does Jupiter end its reign?
When does Jupiter end? Jupiter goes in this summer. Jupiter goes into into Leo. And what you will see in the world is this interest in home improvement and restaurants and food and lifestyle and family will give way to the area of life which is entertainment oriented. And, going to the movies and, recreation.
And speculation and gambling.
And
Yeah.
gambling, absolutely. Again, Neptune is in Aries now with Saturn, but Neptune is in Aries. Every time Neptune is in a fire sign, we have inflation. It'll be there for another 14 years. And last time Neptune was in a fire sign was in 1971 to 84, and it was in Sagittarius. Mm-hmm. And it started with interest rates being around 2% and ended up with mortgage rates being at 21% and interest rates being at 18%. And we will see that kind of inflation now. Mm-hmm. And it looks, anybody who tells you that that inflation is momentary is either lying or just mistaken, because interest rates are going to continue to climb. Anyway,
I just want to add one thing about pronouns. There is one version of the Bible that said, "In the beginning, we created." So if you just consider, if we created, and if you were to replace we with all of the feminine or masculine pronouns, it's a very powerful opportunity to look at what if we ourselves created. Just a thought.
In reality, there is no we. There's only one. Even the word we is an illusion. But you can use any translation of the Bible that you want. I've read it in the original Vulgate. I read it in Latin. I have no axe to grind with anybody using any pronouns that they wish. And if you come to me and say you want me to refer to you as they or she or he or it, I don't care. I'll refer to you however you want. It's like the soul is neither male or female. The soul is not gender specific. That is an illusion that happens in creation for a purpose. Mercury, the androgynous god, creates duality, and male-female duality in the human form is very potent, and it has a deep effect on people's psyche. So that is a nature of what's going on, and there'll be all kinds of things that people have going. I have a friend who's a fundamentalist Christian preacher, and he says to me, I know I'm a terrible person, and he used some expletives. He says, but it doesn't matter because Jesus died for my sins and I'm going to heaven. And okay. But in my world, there's something for me to do. It isn't that grace has to be earned. Grace is grace. And as a sentient being, I am impelled to keep striving because the will to be conscious was present at the beginning when I first entered creation, as it was for everybody. And you can, relax and be in a lounge chair for a while. but eventually that urge to raise your consciousness, the urge to be more conscious, will push you. If you throw a ball in the air, it comes down. If you throw the ball with all your might in the air, it still comes down, but it takes longer. The harder you go out, the harder it comes back down, but the longer it takes to get up, the longer it takes to come down. Everybody, every soul going through creation, when you have the blessing of reaching the human form, you take male and female incarnations. Without intervention of a perfect master, you take 8,400,000 human forms, 8,400,000 incarnations. So how long does it take? Geez, we've been at this, all of us here have been at it for a very, very long time. And hopefully we're getting near the end. But it doesn't matter because we'll all get there. There's nowhere else to go. There's no other game.
Thank you, Bob. That's amazing.
Thank you all for taking the time. I feel a deep love for all of you, and I'm glad to have connected with you for this little bit of time. In India, we say, I salute the God within you, namaste. So you take care, have a wonderful rest of the day, wonderful life. Until we meet again, I'm here. You know I'll give you my contact information if any of you are still here. I'll put it on screen so that we can.
And when I send out the recording, Bob, with your permission, I'll include your email address.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Okay. So.
Is that showing now? Can you see that?
It is. So there's Bob's email address, and it is spelled correctly. So that's his true email address. So if you're looking for an extra letter for his email address, it's not supposed to be there.
Somebody else has Bob Mulligan.
Oh,
but I had this because I got this at the very beginning of AOL, and I was just typing my name in. And it got to the A and it wouldn't take any more letters.
Oh, right.
That was as many digits as at the time.
Got it. Yeah. So
definitely I'm a fossil. Yep. But I have a number of things like I have a video on tuning into the cosmos and the one on unlocking your spiritual potential, the zodiac and the divine impulse to incarnate, all of that.
Your newsletter
on my website. So you can go to YouTube, Bob Mulligan Astrology, and get access to those. And hopefully this will be posted up there after, I'm whatever obligation I have to the organization is completed.
Yep, I will send it out.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for everything.
Okay, well, thank you all. I'm glad that we had an opportunity to be together, and blessings. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Let's get together again. We got to do this more often.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. See you next month.